Σαγί προσκύσα το σάμψη και ψαλά το σάμψη, αλλά λάξετε το Κυρίο, Σαγί. Προς Γαλάτας επιστολής Παύλου, το ανάγνωσμα. Πρόσχομεν. Αδέλφοι, ότε ήλθε το πλήρωμα του χρόνου, εξαπέστειλεν ο Θεός τον Υιόν αυτού, γενόμενον εκ γυναικός, γενόμενον υπονόμων, ή να τους υπονόμων εξαγοράσει, ή να την υιοθεσίαν απολαύομεν. Ότι δε στέει εξαπέστειλεν ο Θεός το πνεύμα του Υιού αυτού εις τας καρδίας ημών κράζων αβάου πατήρ, ώστε ουκ τι δούλος αλλιώς ιδέιος και κληρονόμος Θεού δια Ιησού Χριστού.
Dear friends, good evening. The ecclesiastic period of the saints of the summer is considered by many ecclesiologists to begin with the end of the fast of the Holy Apostles, whose Synaxis we will celebrate in a few days. While every day of the ecclesiastic year presents an opportunity to commemorate and celebrate the lives of saints, martyrs, holy people, and neo-martyrs, the saints of the summer are particularly beloved by many Orthodox in the traditional lands of the faith. Saint Kyriaki, Saint Marina, Saint Paraskivi, Saint Ephemia, Saints Cosmas and Damianos, Saint Panteleimon, and many more saints serve as the persons of honor around which festive summer festivals take place in every village and town in the traditional lands of Orthodoxy, especially Greece, the other Balkan nations, Eastern Europe, Ukraine, and Russia. Tourists flocking to these regions in the summer will come across a village festival almost every week, and while secular music pervades throughout, the festival cannot begin without the formal Vespers, litany, compline, and then the Orthros and the liturgy to the celebrating saint. In older times, villages and towns would compete with one another to secure the service of the Psaltae of old time, the masters, whose unparalleled presentation of chant tradition moved everyone, from young to old. The festivals offered these remarkable and renowned chanters the opportunities to deviate somewhat from the received tradition of the music that they would normally use in their own diaconia, in their own churches. And it was at these festivals where the chanters would unleash their creativity and inspiration, yet always respectful of tradition. It was at the festivals of the saints of the summer where Pringos, Stanitsas, Karamanis, Taliadoros, Hadjimarkos, and many of the more recent renowned Protopsaltae test drove some of their creativity. Recorded audio exists of these inspirations, where the faithful erupted even in clapping and acclamation inside the church to inspirations that we, today, consider to be part of an established music repertoire. One can think of the unparalleled Trisaglia of Stanitsas and Taliadoros, the cherubic hymns of Pringos and Karamanis, and the moving Kratimata, as interpreted by Hadjimarcos. Yet one thing remained constant and unchanging: the manner in which the Epistle and the Gospel was presented to the people, not read, but melodically intoned. This is the tradition of the Orthodox Church: melodic intonation of the Epistle and the Gospel, not read. At the start of today's podcast, one of the lesser known, but among the most traditional psaltae of all time, Alexandros Konstantinou, also known as Alexandros Moutaoglou, who will be profiled today, recites the epistle of the Feast of the Nativity of our Lord Jesus Christ in the most authentic and oldest practice. A novice to the psaltic art, if asked what mode is this epistle being presented, would reply, in third mode, I think. This answer is somewhat correct, in that third mode, being the principal mode representing the enharmonic genus, also shares much in common with a tonal interval practice directed by this phthora, referred to as the Kliton. This symbol, although part of the family of the phthore, is in fact a member of a specific subfamily of the phthore, referred to as the chroa. Some use the English word shade to classify this subfamily of the phthore. There are three symbols that comprise the chroa: the zygos, the spathi, and the kliton. Unlike the phthore, which cause the substitution of full tetrachords for a specified duration in a music score, the chroa act to change only specific intervals inside a tetrachord, and this only for a brief period of time inside a musical score. If one were to show symbols that best define the equivalent of chromaticism in Western music inside Byzantine chant, the chroa would be the most appropriate candidates. The word kliton derives from the Greek word klitos. Literally translated, klitos refers to a person and kliton to an object, a person or object that exhibits physical postural drooping, physical falling, physical bending. And so, the chroa of the kliton is intended to direct a melodic drooping and bending. Before we better understand what this means, it is important to examine the evolution of this symbol. Historically, the symbol of the kliton derives from one of the hieroglyphs of the old stenographic notation method. The historic symbol was called imiphthoron, and it is shown here. It is referred to specifically in the Great Exercise by Ioannis Koukouzelis, referred to as the Great Ison of the Papadiki. It is one of the phthores of the old stenographic notation that alters the value of tonal intervals between specific phthongs. Chrysanthos, in his great theory book, notes that the kliton is placed on the, and when done so, it directs alterations in the tonal intervals of diga and gavu on descent from the. The tonal intervals above the remain unchanged. Chrysanthos describes the actions as a sharpening of the interval diga by a quarter of a full major interval, and then on descent, the stabilization of a major interval. A number of theory books of the 18th century note that the kliton creates the quality of nana, which is in essence a referral to the enharmonic genus, and particularly to third mode, as nana is the epichema of third mode. In his theory book published in 1851, Margaritis Dorovianitis compares the tonal intervals caused as a consequence of the action of the kliton to the tonal intervals of third mode. The similarity is notable. And Theodoros Fokaeas also notes that the kliton is underpinned by nana, as he presents tonal intervals similar to those of Chrysanthos and to his own contemporaries. While the note about nana is shared among most of the theory books of the period, the actual numerical values assigned to the tonal intervals vary, and even though the impression is accepted that the Kliton directs an action where the descending phthongs create a third mode-like acoustic outcome, there has been vigorous debate over the past century about their precise value. And this has resulted in two camps of how to interpret the Kliton vocally. One camp argues that the intervals vi, ga, vu, pa should approximate those of third mode, ga, vu, pa, ni, in descent. The other camp argues that, although the interval vi, ga is sharpened by anywhere between a half to a quarter of a major interval, the interval ga, vu should be uber sharpened to the point of being extremely attracted by ga. Which of the two camps has a basis in the received tradition? The answer lies in listening to the Psaltae of old time. Listening to these chanters, it becomes apparent that the melodic progression beginning at the point of insertion of the Kliton remarkably resembles an enharmonic tetrachord. The Patriarchal Committee in its 1883 publication shows the intervals created by the Kliton as what you see on the screen. The intervals viga 4, gavu 12, vupa 14. If one considers the enharmonic tetrachord intervals on descent as 6, 12, 12, it is somewhat intuitive to accept the received tradition of the old-time Psaltae in performing the intervals in a manner reminiscent of third mode, where the can be considered as ga. More revealing are historical manuscripts. Consider this one. Where today is placed the Kliton in the verse Side Kyrie Polie Panistande of Makarios Anir, old manuscripts show the phthora of ga, reflecting the nana quality that the musical phrase should exhibit from this point until the neutralization of the phthora. Thus, it is again intuitive to understand that the Kliton calls on the vocalist to chromaticize the melody to create a musical impression of a drooping, but in a manner reflecting nana. And this can only be accomplished by sharpening the diatonic interval viga and then stabilizing a major interval for gavu, in line with all theory books of the 18th century and the practice of the old-time Psaltae. Uber sharpening the interval gavu, as some argue, has no basis in the received tradition. Possibly the best examples to appreciate this are the hymns that comprise the anaphora of the Kliton, which we now present.
Πατέραιον και Αγίον Πνεύμα, τριάδα ομόσιον και αχωριστόν, έλεον ειρήνης της Ιαννανάσεως, και μετά του πνεύματός σου έχομεν προς τον Κύριον άξιον και δίκαιον. Άγιος, Άγιος, Άγιος Κύριος Σαβαώθ, πλήρης ο ουρανός και η γη της δόξης σου, ωσανά εν της υψής της, ευλογημένος ο ερχόμενος εν ονόματι Κυρίου, ωσανά ο εν της υψής της. Σε υμνούμεν, σε ευλογούμεν, σοι ευχαριστούμεν Κύριε, και δεόμεθα σου, ο Θεός ημών.
The anaphora that you heard is the oldest surviving expression of those hymns. It is known with certainty that this was the only anaphora melodically intoned inside the Patriarchal Church at the Phanar for at least the period between the 17th century through the early 19th century. As the Epistle and Gospel readings were intoned with a Kliton, it would make sense that the continuity of the liturgy inside the anaphora would reflect the simple plain chant melodic recitation, and according to what is known, this melodic recitation was directed by the Kliton. Indeed, where one may be challenged by what mode to sing an anaphora on weekdays in their church, where the liturgy duration gravitates towards brevity, the answer is this old but very traditional anaphora. The anaphora of intoned the, directed by the action of the Kliton. Dear friends, we listened to this very simple anaphora intoned by one of the lesser-known Protopsaltae of old time, yet very respected by his more renowned peers. Alexandros Konstantinou, given the nickname Moutaoglou, and also referred to as Alexandros Moutaoglou. Today, the podcast would like to feature this remarkable Protopsaltis of old time, one of the most traditional of psaltae, who graced churches in Constantinople and later in Greece.
παρατηρήσεις, Κύριε, Κύριε, τις υποστήσετε, ότι παρασύ ο ηλεσμός έστι. Παντικοστήν εορτάζομαι και πνεύματος επιδημίαν και προθεσμίαν επαγγελίας και ελπίδωσιν πλήρωσιν και το μυστήριον όσον ως μέγατε και σεβασμίον δημιουργέτου παντός, Κύριε, δόξα σοι. Να αξιώνεστην ως αληθώς, μακαρίζειν σε την Θεό τόκον, την αημακαριστόν και παναμονητόν και μητέρα του Θεού ημών την τιμίον πέραν των χερουβίμ και δόξων πέραν ασυγκρίτως των σεραφείμ την αδεία φθόρος Θεόν λόγων τεκούσαν κοινώντος Θεόν τόκον σε με
Alexandros Konstantinou, referred to by his nickname Moutaoglou by his contemporaries, was born in Constantinople on the 2nd of August 1895 in the Agri-Kapou neighborhood, which is a neighborhood very close to the old Theodosian Byzantine walls, and in particular the synonymed Old Byzantine entry gate that is close to the Vlacherna Palace. From a very young age, he served as a canonarch of Aristidis Karatzakis, the Protopsaltis of the Virgin Theotokos Church of Souda in Agri-Kapou. He then served as chanter of St. Demetrius, Xyloporta, which served as the old-time patriarchate, followed by a stint as chanter at the Church of the Archangels, and then the Church of Christ at Galata. Subsequently, he served as domestikos of Theodosios Koumousoglou at St. George Potiras, and then as domestikos of Georgios Vlachopoulos in the same church. His musical entry into the world of ecclesiastic chant was facilitated by his first teacher, Theodosios Koumousoglou, who himself was a student of Georgios Redestinos. He was a graduate of the Constantinopolitan Ecclesiastical Music School and also served as an assistant to the renowned Protopsaltis Triandaphilos Georgiadis. Finally, he served as Protopsaltis at the Church of St. Constantine and Helen at Ipsomathia until 1924, when he left for Greece as part of the population exchanges. In a recorded interview, he states that he also served as domestikos at the Patriarchal Church of St. George at the later years of Iakovos Nafpliotis' service as Patriarchal Protopsaltis. In Greece, he sang as a cantor at the Church of the Transfiguration at Syngrou Avenue, at the Church of All Saints at Charokopo Kalithea, and later at the Church of the Holy Trinity at Agrinio. In his later years, he sang at the Church of the Assumption in Koropi, Attica, at the Church of St. Ioannis of Vouliagmeni in Attica, and finally at the Church of St. Fotini in the Nea Smyrna municipality of Attica. He retired from active and formal service to the church in 1958. Alexandros Konstantinou, nicknamed Moutaoglou, was a virtuosic melodist expressing the chant style of his Constantinopolitan teachers with a very deep knowledge about the theory and practice of Byzantine ecclesiastic chant. Many of his contemporaries note his style and ethos as one resembling that of Iakovos Nafpliotis, and although he was never a formal student of the great patriarchal Protopsaltis, his ethos would be expected to have been acquired during his service as domestikos at the Patriarchal Church at the Phanar. As a person, Alexandros Konstantinou was described as meek, noble, and humble by his contemporaries, who are documented to have held him in high appreciation and love. He enjoyed a lifelong friendship with another notable Constantinopolitan cantor who left the Byzantine city for Greece in the 1920s, Patroklos Pananidis.
Hymno,
Dear friends, among the very insightful questions we received since last month's podcast, the one that we felt should be addressed to a wide audience is this one. Why is the first antiphon of fourth mode sung in the Orthros of the principal Dominical and Marian feast days, as well as in the Orthros of some of the saints? What is the historical basis of this? To answer this question, it is important to first understand the origin of the set of hymns known as the Anavathmoi, encountered on Sunday Orthros. The word Anavathmoi, and in its singular, Anavathmos, has its basis in the ancient Greek word that can be translated as a stepwise ascent. The Anavathmoi, as a hymnographic element of the Sunday Orthros, are compositions based upon the Song of Ascents in the Psalter and sung immediately before the Prokeimenon and the Matins Gospel. Ecclesiologically, they belong to the unity of the Matins Gospel, and they are one of the pillars of the Asthmatic Vigil. I mentioned that the Anavathmoi are a hymnographic element of the Orthros, based upon the Song of Ascents in the Psalter. What is the Song of Ascents? This is the title given to the collection of 15 psalms, specifically Psalms 119 to 133 in the Septuagint and Vulgate numbering, or 120 to 134 in the new numbering. Each of the psalms begins with a superscription Shir HaMa'aloth, which means Song of the Ascents, or in the case of Psalm 121, Shir LaMa'aloth, which means a song regarding ascents. These 15 psalms are also referred to as the gradual psalms, the 15 psalms, the songs of degrees, the songs of steps, the songs for going up to worship, or the pilgrim songs. Many scholars believe that these psalms were sung by worshippers and pilgrims as they ascended the road to Jerusalem to attend the 3 pilgrim festivals as described in Deuteronomy 16:16. Other scholars propose that they were sung by the Levites as they ascended the 15 steps to minister at the temple in Jerusalem. Mitchell proposes that the Levites first sang the songs at the dedication of Solomon's temple during the night of the 15th of Tishri in 959 BC. Goulder proposes that they were composed for a celebration after Nehemiah's rebuilding of Jerusalem's walls in 445 BC. Hosfeld and Zenger consider that they may originally have been individual poems later collected together and giving the title linking them to pilgrimage after the Babylonian captivity. They are characterized by brevity, by a key word, by repetition, and by their epigrammatic style. More than half express a cheerful ethos, and all express strong hope. They present a number of repeated formulaic phrases, as well as an emphasis on Zion. According to scholarly investigation, the wide belief is that the composer of the Sunday Orthros Anavathmoi was Theodore the Studite, who was inspired by the verses of the Song of Ascents, very possibly during his exile in Thessaloniki in 794 CE. Musically, the Anavathmoi are composed in all 8 modes of Byzantine chant, and they are sung inside the Sunday Orthros. For each of the modes, the Anavathmoi are grouped into 3 stases, or sets of verses. Each of these stases formally define an antiphon. Thus, the Anavathmoi consist of 3 antiphons. The exception is for plagal 4th mode, where an additional stasis, an antiphon, is encountered. On Sundays, the Anavathmoi are chanted according to the mode of the week. The antiphons of the authentic modes, that is, 1st to 4th mode, draw their verses from the first 12 psalms in the Songs of Ascent. Those of the plagal modes begin again from Psalm 119, using the same psalms and in principle the same verses as their authentic parallels. The whole scheme works out as shown in the illustrated table. Disturbing the equipoise of this arrangement, plagal 4th mode adds a 4th and final antiphon with verses from Psalm 132. The obvious question is why? The answer is provided by the Grotta Ferrata manuscripts, which reveal in their rubric, that is rubric EA6, that this antiphon was to be chanted specifically at memorials and commemorations of saints, Antiphonon psalomenon is mnimin Agion, an antiphon sung at the commemoration of saints. Hence, while the first 24 antiphons are for ordinary use, the 25th and last was at one time reserved for feasts of a particular class. Eventually, it became appended as a 4th antiphon to the Anavathmoi of plagal 4th mode. It is useful to note how the theme of the psalms in the Song of Ascents, from which are derived the antiphons, inspired the Anavathmoi of the Christian Church. Every psalm that constitutes the antiphons of the Anavathmoi begins with a cry and a prayer made by the Jewish slaves to God in their tribulation and ends with their complete restoration in Jerusalem. Following this theme, the composer now considers the Ecclesia, people of God, that is, the Christian people, to be enslaved not to Babylon, but enslaved to their passions, crying for salvation. Where then will these people, slaves to passions, run to for salvation? Not in the physical Jerusalem, as written in the Psalms, but instead in the Upper Jerusalem. Just as the Jewish people longed to return to their earthly homeland Jerusalem, the new people of God now long to return to the New Jerusalem. The 3rd verse of every antiphon is a doxological expression of thanks and rejoicing to the Holy Trinity. Thus, the composer parallels the search for salvation of the Christian people to the search of return of the Israelites to Jerusalem. While a remnant of the Asmatic Vigil, informed by the archaic Jewish tradition, symbolically today, the Anavathmoi of the Orthros are sung as a reminder that Christians are ascending to the heavenly Jerusalem, in that the spiritual intensity of the Orthros is rising on the approach of the Orthros gospel reading. Now that the basis of the Anavathmoi has been established, let's address the question concerning the use of the first antiphon of 4th mode for the Dominical and Marian feasts, as well as those of the major saints. First, Matins gospel readings were historically instituted outside of Sundays, only for major feast days. Prior to the gospel readings, historically, a prokimenon was sung. Second, unlike Sunday Orthros, where 3 antiphons are sung prior to the prokimenon and the Orthros gospel, early ecclesiastic practice directed that only one antiphon be used to distinguish the non-Sunday feasts, be they Dominical, Marian, or feasts of certain saints, from the resurrectional Sunday hymns. Third, the pre-gospel prokimenon of every major feast day in the ecclesiastical year was sung in 4th mode. Therefore, in order to maintain modal continuity, the pre-gospel antiphon ought to be in the same mode as the prokimenon. As 4th mode bridges the prokimenon and the psalms, comprising the antiphons of 4th mode, the first antiphon of 4th mode was therefore selected as the only antiphon to distinguish the non-Sunday feasts from the established Sunday antiphons. Let's now see how this first antiphon, which consists of Psalm 128, or 129 in the new numbering, evolved into the 4 verses used today in the Greek Orthodox Church Orthros of Dominical, Marian, and feast days of major celebrated saints, remembering that it was the received practice to also sing a refrain after every psalmic verse. In the instance of the first antiphon of 4th mode, there were 2 refrains. Let's look at the whole structure.
Lord.
In later years, one additional doxologic verse was added, this time prefaced by both now and forever, thus leaving the original doxologic Trinitarian verse to be preceded by glory to the Father. This verse, following the both now and forever, was inspired by the third verse from Psalm 132, or 133 by the new numbering, «Ως δρόσος αερμόνι καταβαίνουσα επί τα όρη Σιών, ότι εκείεν ετήλα το Κύριος την ευλογίαν, ζωήν έως του αιώνος, as the dew of Hermon, and as the dew that descended upon the mountains of Zion. For there the Lord commanded the blessing, even life forevermore». And thus the need to distinguish major feasts from the Sunday resurrectional theme required a derogation from the Sunday Anavathmoi to be in line with a traditional mode of the sung pre-gospel prokimenon, which was fourth mode. Dear friends, there are many days in the ecclesiastic year that are designated as Synaxis of a saint, Synaxis of the Theotokos, Synaxis of the Forerunner, and in a few days from today, Synaxis of the Holy Apostles. Exactly what does this refer to? The original Greek is Synaxis pros timin ke mnimi, that is, a gathering, a coming together of people to honor and memorialize a person, persons, or an event. The focus of these gatherings was a Eucharistic celebration with special references to the celebrated person or event. The most likely origin of the term is based on the gathering of the apostles at Pentecost, where, receiving the Holy Spirit, they then went out to the various places, spreading their witness and the teachings of Christ as they established the first Christian communities. In ecclesiastical history, such gatherings took place in the cemeteries of the places where the early Christian martyrs were buried, praising the deeds and the life of these martyrs. There, a promise was made by all to eventually erect a shrine in honor of the martyr. By copying the arrangement of the ancient Greek temples, shrines were erected with a sacred podium and the holy altar inside. At these synaxes, in addition to the Eucharist, eulogies were read to the martyrs. Many of these eulogies were later adapted into a compendium that became known as the Synaxarion. In the Byzantine calendar, these Eucharistic liturgical gatherings of believers occurred inside those shrines on the day following the principal feast day of Dominical, Marian feasts, and what are referred to as the great saints.
Kyrie
Dear friends, while chanters serve inside the church, where the center is the holy table, we ought to also consider that the analogion around which chanters stand serves as a center of our Synaxis and fellowship. At least it ought to. In a few days, we will celebrate the Synaxis of the 12 Apostles, where Christians came together in agape to listen to learn, and then to vigorously disseminate the apostolic eulogies and praises, to establish and disseminate the apostolic tradition. This term, apostolic tradition, has a formal definition inside the Orthodox Church. It defines the boundaries of what belongs, and it also defines the boundaries of what is foreign to the Orthodox Christian Church and the Orthodox Christian culture. We live in a period in time where everything has become relative, where facts are no longer treated as facts, and where lies are presented as truths. Our Orthodox tradition has survived largely intact over 1,500 years. Will today's postmodernists succeed in injecting foreign venoms into its ethos, shattering the established apostolic tradition? We are certain that Christ will not allow this to happen. Adventurists abound, yet Christ is the Alpha and the Omega, and the apostles, in their epistles, established what is the faith and what is the tradition. Let us come together, my friends, in a few days, in Synaxis to honor and celebrate the 12 apostles, in preserving what the apostles told us to be true and Christian, and in addition, to renewing our strength, to preserve this, to be modern apostles of Him, Christ, Lord, King, and God. To Him belongs all glory, today, tomorrow, and always. Amen.
Orthros